In Liberia, on April 12, 1980, Samuel K. Doe led a coup against President William Tolbert and the government at the time, ending 133 years of Americo-Liberian rule. Since the country's founding, Liberia has been plagued with an extremely important internal conflict between the indigenous population and the Americo-Liberians. Doe was the first Liberian head of state of native descent and broke the barrier imposed by decades of racism towards the indigenous population. His coup marked the start of years of political and economic instability in Liberia. If you've ever seen the Liberian flag, you would notice its strong similarities to the flag of the United States. The country's capital city, Monrovia, was even named after U.S. President James Monroe. This is because of the people who founded Liberia. In the early 19th century, America was home to around 2 million African Americans. Most were slaves who were considered to have no rights at all. But free blacks did not have the same rights as white people either. Many people thought that in order for black people to enjoy greater freedoms than they had in the U.S., they needed their own country. And so, the American Colonization Society, or ACS, was formed. There were other reasons too. Some white people also wanted to remove large numbers of free blacks from the country, and others wanted the black Americans to promote Christianity in Africa. Whatever the different motivations were, the American Colonization Society was founded in 1816 by a group of prominent ministers and politicians in the United States to resettle black people in West Africa. In 1820, the ACS sent the first group of African Americans to Liberia, and by 1822, Monrovia was founded. The American Colonization Society helped thousands of free slaves emigrate from the United States to Liberia. In 1847, the Liberian Declaration of Independence was written, and Liberia, the so-called Land of Liberty, was an independent nation. Those Americans who settled in Liberia were called Americo-Liberians. They were instantly the ruling class, as they were better educated. They settled on the coast and formed a society much like the racist culture of the American South. The Americo-Liberians claimed sovereignty over the natives, believing that they were culturally better than the indigenous population, and treated them as inferiors. The indigenous or native population included 16 different tribes and constituted for as much as 96% of the population. They weren't allowed to participate in government and did not even have birthright citizenship until 1904. Native Liberians were treated like second-class citizens, even though they were the majority of the population. It wasn't until 1946 until they got the right to vote and participate in elections. This was under the presidency of William V.S. Tubman, who served 7 terms from 1944 until his death in 1971. When his vice president, William R. Tolbert, became president, he tried to improve the economic and political climate by introducing many new changes, but his attempt to liberalize Liberian society backfired. Many natives could not bear the political dominance of Americo-Liberians anymore. In April 1979, Tolbert proposed an increase in the price of imported rice, which resulted in the rice riots. Rice is Liberia's staple food, and many people could not afford the increase in price. The riots led to many deaths and enormous infrastructural damage to Monrovia.
Liberians, prior to the riot, were relatively peaceful, and they still are peaceful people, but they had not in the past, prior to the riot, resorted to demonstration to express their frustration. That was a singular moment in the country's history, and I think it ultimately led to the coup a year later that overthrew the president of the country at the time, Mr. William Tolbert.
On April 8, 1980, 133 years of Americo-Liberian rule ended. Samuel K. Doe, a part of the Crown tribe, one of the 16 ethnic groups in Liberia, led a bloody coup that killed President Tolbert and 13 other government officials. The coup was strongly supported by the native population at the time, who watched and celebrated the public execution.
At the time, the coup was really popular. Many ordinary Liberians who at the time felt that the ruling elite had suppressed them for all these years now felt liberated because the coup leaders were all indigenous Liberians. They were greeted as heroes, literally. And so it was so popular. Even when the government officials were tried and summarily executed, people rejoiced, which was a strange phenomenon at the time.
Doe promised to liberate the masses from the corrupt and oppressive domination of the few, and pledged a more equitable distribution of wealth. This did not happen, and Samuel Doe soon became an even worse tyrant. Though the native people finally had someone to represent them, Doe's government was still marked by the corruption of previous government. In addition, he lacked experience, was not well educated, and just wasn't prepared to rule. Doe feared for his security and power and eliminated council members who challenged him. He began to favor people of his own ethnic background and surrounded himself with them instead. Doe held an election in 1985, which he actually lost, but manipulated the results in his favor in order to transition from a military ruler to a civilian president. He founded the Second Republic of Liberia in 1986. In 1989, a Liberian of American descent named Charles Taylor led a coup against Doe's regime. He once ran the General Services Agency under Doe, but was accused of embezzling money from the government. Doe's torture and death was recorded and broadcasted for the entire country to see, and this action precipitated a devastating civil war, lasting from 1989 to 1996, in which various ethnic groups fought for control of the nation. Taylor won the presidency by a landslide in 1997 with the slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." Fighting started again with the start of the Second Liberian Civil War in 1999, as a rebel group emerged with the goal of removing Charles Taylor from the presidency. In March 2003, Taylor was indicted on 17 counts of crimes by the United Nations, and Liberians started increasing their calls for Taylor to leave office. That August, Taylor was forced to resign after his rivals gained control of Monrovia. He voluntarily went into exile, with his vice president taking power, therefore ending the war. Today, Liberia is still recovering from the two civil wars. 250,000 people, about 10% of the population, died in these wars, and thousands more fled. Teachers, doctors, engineers, and other professionals in important areas left the country, which made reconstruction much harder. Infrastructural damage during the Liberian conflict was huge. Rebel fighters left nothing untouched. Houses and public buildings were looted and burned, and vehicles were taken. The residents of Monrovia were left without electricity for years. There was also a terrible economic collapse, one of the largest recorded, which left almost 2/3 of Liberians falling under the poverty line. The conflict between natives and Americo-Liberians is still a running undercurrent in politics. Liberia's current president, George Weah, asserts that people are against him more than the previous Americo president because he is of native descent. Despite this, the issue is no longer violent, and perhaps one day, the divide between the Americo and native peoples of Liberia will be no more.